We began a few weeks ago trying to understand the Ramban's Shita in Zechiras Yom Shabbos Lekadsho. And the truth be told, that the Ramban's Shita is very complex. From what we can tell, the Ramban went through two different, we'll call it Gilgulim, so to speak, two different approaches to the mitzvah of Zechiras Yom Shabbos Lekadsho. And both of them are based on midrashim, but one medrash, which is the second one that he quotes, seems to shift the entire focus regarding this mitzvah, or at least, to be more precise, the second approach is focused on the word lekadsho. And the Ramban has a medrash in which he reveals a whole new pshat in the word lekadsho. So let's first go through the part of the Ramban based on the first medrash, and that is that the mitzvah of Zechiras Yom Shabbos Lekadsho applies not just on Shabbos, as we would have intuitively said, but the whole week long. And in essence, the mitzvah of Zechiras Yom Shabbos Lekadsho is a perpetual, constant mitzvah, 24/7, the whole week long, should be added, as we said last time, to the list of the Sefer HaChinuch, who lists 6 different mitzvahs tmidios. We should add a 7th, according to the Ramban. And the Ramban, quoting a medrash, tells us that the whole week long, we should be remembering the Shabbos. For example, he says we don't count days by names like Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. That's from the Goyim. We count days by Rishon l'Shabbos, Sheni l'Shabbos, etc. So we're counting down towards Shabbos, and that is a mitzvah d'oraisa, says Ramban, of Zechiras Yom Shabbos Lekadsho, remembering the Shabbos. Another example he quotes for the Medrash is that apparently Shammai HaZaken would set aside the best that he got. Let's say he got a hold of a very good piece of meat, an animal, whatever it is, and he would set it aside for Shabbos. If on the next day he got a better piece of meat, he would take the first piece of meat, eat it, and then set the second one for Shabbos, and so forth and so on. And it seems from the Ramban that that understanding of designating something for Shabbos is the mitzvah of Zachar, which he calls Zikaron Tamid. Tamid, says the Ramban, always remembering the Shabbos. And even Hillel would normally have agreed with Shammai that we should set it aside for Shabbos, not eat it today, but Hillel has a very great midah of bitachon, in which he relies on Hashem that if he eats this piece of meat today, Hashem will provide him with a better piece of meat tomorrow, and so forth and so on. So he doesn't have to feel that he's detracting from the Shabbos. But fundamentally, Hillel is on the same side of the migrash, what we call of the court, as Shammai, and if not for his unbelievable midah of bitachon, which is way beyond our midah of bitachon, then he too would want to designate whatever he has for the Shabbos. So the Ramban says that the mitzvah is to remember the Shabbos the whole week long, and lo nishkachelu, we should never forget the Shabbos. The Ramban goes on to say that there are 2 parts to this mitzvah of remembering the Shabbos. One is sort of like a positive mitzvah of Zachar, and the other is like a negative mitzvah of Shamar. And in the first set of Dibros, which we have here in Parashas Yisro, it's Zechiras Yom Shabbos Lekadsho. And that's a mitzvah saseh, says the Ramban. On the other hand, in the second set of Aseres HaDibros, that's in Parashas Vayeschanan, it says Shomeres Yom Shabbos Lekadsho. That is a lo saseh. And the Ramban goes on to tell us that even though there seems to be a discrepancy between the 2 sets of Aseres HaDibros as to whether the mitzvah here is a positive mitzvah of Zachar or a negative mitzvah of Shamar, because Shamar is always a language of a negative mitzvah, says the Ramban, well, it's actually two sides of the same coin to such an extent that a woman would be obligated in the mitzvah of Zachar, despite the fact that it's a mitzvah seishes mein grama, because she's included under Shamar. And he quotes the Gemara in Brachos Daf Chaf that says, Kol sheyeshno b'shmira yeshno b'schira. So we see sort of like an integration of both the losas and the essay, with an nafkamina that she, who would not be included in the essay under normal situations, but she's included in the losas of Shamar, she's now included in the Zachar, and she's obligated in the mitzvah of Zachar min Torah because of this equation between Shamar and Zachar. The Ramban doesn't give us an insight as to why in Parshas Yisro the Torah starts with the assay of Zachar, and only later on in the second set of Dibros in Parshas Vayeschanan does the Torah introduce the Shamar. Why was Zachar placed here and Shamar placed there? But we do get a little bit of a clue if we read carefully, meticulously the language of the Ramban, because Ramban is going to tell us that a mitzvah aseh is greater than a mitzvah lo aseh, which is sort of an oxymoron, meaning it sounds antithetical. We would have said intuitively that a lo aseh is a lot more important, a lot more chomer than an essay. But the Ramban invokes the principle of essay docha lo aseh, which means that we'll override a losa for the sake of an essay. And he goes on to say that an essay is the bechin of ava, to love Hashem, whereas a losa says yira, of a fear of the Lord, therefore we don't want to violate his will. But ava is a greater level than yira, and therefore an essay, which is ava, is greater than a losa, which is called yira. And the Ramban is saying that in Shabbos we have both. We have both the essay and the losa, two sides of a coin. But because of the equation between the two, a woman is obligated in the mitzvah of Zachar just like a man. Now the Ramban goes on to say,
what about the concept of Zachar Shamar b'dibur echad?
So that b'dibur echad sort of integrates these two.
Yeah, so they were essentially, you could say, it was presented both at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know. You have to really understand, Bobby, what b'dibur echad means. You know, mashe peni yochel daber, ozen eni yochel shmo. I don't know exactly what. But on a halachic level, at least we say that Shamar and Zachar overlap and they work in tandem, and therefore she's included in Shamar, she's included in Zachar. But here the Ramban has a major breakthrough. And he bases it apparently on Rab Nechuni ben Akana, one of the Tanoim, who authored a work which is called the Sefer HaBahir. And according to that work, there's a sod, a certain secret that the Sefer HaBahir reveals, and that is that there's a difference between the night of Shabbos and the day of Shabbos, which is so counterintuitive. I mean, we intuitively sense that Shabbos is a 24-hour continuum, one entity that's indivisible. We would never break it down into two component parts, but that's what the Sefer HaBahir does. And here's where Zachar v'Shamar comes into play. The mitzvah of Shamar is connected to Laila, whereas the mitzvah of Zachar is connected to Yom. And the proof of the pudding, says the Ramban, is that the Kiddush that we recite by day is called Kiddusha Rabbah, which means it's the great Kiddush. Why is it the great Kiddush? Because Kiddush is part of Zachar, it's part of the Mitzvah Say. And now we're saying that the Ikar Zachar is by day, and therefore the Kiddush by day trumps the Kiddush by night. Again, something that's very counterintuitive. You know, if you like to have a schnapps at Kiddush by day, that's okay, all right, Hasidic business. Don't overdo it, because then you'll be in trouble with the rabbi, or maybe the former rabbi. Anyway, but what we want to say is that where's the yayin? The yayin is at night. It would seem that the real bona fide Kiddush, the real McCoy, is at night. And Kedusha Rabbah, according to many Rishonim, is just a euphemism. It's what we call Lashon Saginor, so that the Kiddush by day should not be insulted. We call it Kedusha Rabbah, but in truth, it's the Kedusha Zuta, not the Kedusha Rabbah. It's the secondary Kedusha. But here, he's got Rav Nechunya ben Akana, and he's saying that the Zechiras is by Yom, and Shmir is by Laila. Now, the only thing I could say to add to this is this would explain why we call Shabbos at night a Kala. And the Gemara records that the Amoraim used to go out to the fields and say, Boi Likras Shabbos Malkasa. So that Shabbos at night is called a female, a Malka. Because Shabbos at night is the negative. It's the Lotas, it's the Shamar at night, which is specifically addresses or dedicated to the women folk because they're included on the Shamar of the Losasa, because women have the same status as men for Losasas, and therefore when we enter into the Shabbos at night, we're entering to the element of Losasa, and Losasa here certainly means to abstain from the 39 categories of Malacha, and it's an element of the Nekeva, so to speak, the feminine. Now, honestly, I don't think we'll get a grasp over this Ramban until we see another Ramban, which is going to be the second half of today's discussion, and Mitzvah Hashem, if we get to it, and that's the Ramban in Breishis. So I want to thank David Spiegel for sending out that message that if you could equip yourself with two Rambans, the Ramban in Parshas Yisro and the Ramban in Parshas Breishis at the very beginning of the Torah, because we're going to see if we can somehow integrate the two. That's my goal for today. I don't know. Again, it means a lot of work to try to understand the Ramban and put all the pieces together. And as we said before, if nighttime is the Losaseh, whereas daytime Zohar is the essay, and the essay is greater than the Losas, and the Kiddush by day is greater than the Kiddush at night, it's a Kiddush Rabbah, it means that as we enter into the Shabbos and move from the night of Shabbos to the day of Shabbos, we are climbing, we are ascending higher and higher in the levels of Kedusha Shabbos. That Shabbos now in the daytime becomes much more profound and intense than Shabbos at night. And truth be told, the only halacha that I would quote, which the Ramban doesn't quote, to try to support this, is what's called Kvod Hayom Adif. And you're all familiar with the fact that in halacha it says if you have something very special, instead of using it Friday night, save it for Shabbos day. Which seems to indicate two things, two chidushim. Number one, that Shabbos is made up of two different segments of Zman. It's not one continuum of Zman. And number two, that the second segment of Shabbos, namely Shabbos by day, supersedes the segment of Shabbos at night, which according to the Sefer HaBoyer means that the daytime is Zachar is Essay, the nighttime is Shomer is Losas, and an Essay is greater than a Losas, because Ava is greater than Yira. So we ascend, this ladder, and we climb from Shabbos at night to Shabbos during the day. I might be inclined to say, according to Ramban, but again, don't quote me on this. It's very tenuous kind of logic. That Shabbos at night is mostly our initiative down here on earth, where Shabbos by day is Hashem's initiative, which is that much greater than our initiative. Okay. Now, what do we do with the word lekacho, according to the first approach that we've been working on and presenting in the Ramban? It would seem that the Ramban is holding that lekacho at this point is an extension of what we do during the week in the mitzvah tamid of Zachar. What does that mean? So to quote the language of the Ramban, and I think this was almost the last thing that we got up to, the Ramban says, Al derech hapshat, Omru, shehi mitzvah, meaning Zechiras Yom HaShabbos, shenazkir, shenizkar tamid, b'chol yom, es HaShabbos. Excuse me. Okay? That's Zohar. The tam lekacho. Tam in the Ramban means the meaning of lekacho. And now he's shifting over to Shabbos. Until now he's talking about Sunday to Thursday, Sunday to Friday. Shin zichronenu bo, our awareness on Shabbos should be lios kadosh beinenu, that this day is sanctified. And as a result of the sanctity, everything that we do on this day should be somehow related to our intention to make this a sanctified day. And therefore, any time that we fulfill a mitzvah on Shabbos, like for example, the mitzvah of Shvisa, which means we don't go to work, we don't do work, there are many different explanations and thoughts and intentions you could have when you desist from doing malach on Shabbos. You could say, well, it's good, for the digestive system. It's good for the psychology and the rest, and it's a day of rest, and we recharge our batteries, and you can come up with all sorts of very good explanations for Shabbos and for the Shvis of Shabbos. And if you're a leader in like an NCSY Kirivkon program, maybe that's what you should do. But that's not what the Torah asks you to do. The Torah asks you to see this day as kadosh, as sanctified, and therefore, because of its kedusha, everything you do today, all the shvisa when you don't do malacha, lipanos me iske machshavos. Could you imagine getting up in front of an audience of modern Jews and telling them on Shabbos they shouldn't be thinking about the business, they shouldn't be thinking about investments, about where and when they're going to buy an apartment, and so forth and so on? Those are all iske machshavos vehevle azman. That's all very much grounded in time. We're supposed to go above time on Shabbos. So all the machshavos, says Ramban, should be focused on Shu Yom Kadosh. And all the oneg, all the great food we have, the chamin, the cholent, or whatever, depends on whether you're Tunisian or you're African, or wherever you're from, to whatever you're eating, to make sure. My neighbor here eats something called kibbeh, apparently a Moroccan dish. He gave it to me to taste. I'm not a big kibbeh fan yet. Maybe it's an acquired taste. I don't know. But whatever you eat on Shabbos, you have a geshmak cholent. Tell yourself that you're eating it latet lenafshenu oneg b'darkei Hashem. Unbelievable. Then he goes on to say l'leches el hachachamim ve'el hanavim. He has a couple of proofs for that. Then on this day of Shabbos we go to Chacham. Everything is spiritual. Everything is for the sake of kedusha, and that's going to be lekadsha. Then he goes on to tell me, why is Shabbos so important? Oh, by the way, I just forgot to tell you that he says that you're not allowed to have your animal work for you, because that's going to lead you to have a focus on, iske hevle hazman. Shabbos shkula keneged kol mitzvahs. Where is this? Chulin daf hey amid aleph. Put all 612 on one side of the scale, Shabbos on the other side of the scale, and Shabbos could hold its own. It's shkula keneged kol mitzvahs. And why? And here the Ramban again comes up with a major breakthrough, a revolution of sorts. And he says, Mipnei sheba, ba meaning through the observance of Shabbos, na'id, we testify, al kol ikrei ha'amuna, on all the basic three pillars of our faith. Number one, Hidush. right? Ma'aser Bereshis, God created the world. Number two, Hashgacha, that God is involved in this world. And number three, Nevuah, that God communicates with man through his Nevi. And our Eidos of Shabbos includes all of this. Why? Because if God created the world, then obviously he cares about the world. Not only that, he's the author of the world, and he could therefore change, all the laws of nature and bring about miracles and sensational, shall we say, metaphysical experiences, and all this is a result of God's creation. So basically, Shabbos is Zecher L'Ma'aser Bereshis. And the Ramban takes sharp opposition against the Aristotelian belief called the eternity of the universe, that the universe was always here. Because if you don't believe in Ma'aser Bereshis, says the Ramban, you're denying all the fundamentals of our emunah that are based on Ma'aser Bereshis. Okay. So Ad Kan Hakofa Aleph, and this is what we call Pshuto Shel Mikra. Or he says Al Derech HaPshat. And that Al Derech HaPshat is largely based on the Mechilta here in Parshas Yisro. And also on a Medrash of Shammai HaZoken, which according to Rabbi Shavel is somewhere in another Mechilta. I don't know. Anyway, this is the first approach. Zok the Ramban, Ula Rabboseinu, Avol Rabboseinu. Now, I think I pointed this out to you, but I want to emphasize it again and again and again. The printed edition that I'm using here for the Ramban, which is called Moser of Cook, I don't know if that's the one you have or you could get. They have all of this Ramban in one paragraph. They don't break it down into smaller paragraphs. So to use the phrase, press the return button, I would say that with the word Avol in the Ramban, we're at a crossroads and we should press the return button. This is a new paragraph and a new approach to this mitzvah of Zechiras Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho. And he calls it Avol L'Rabboseinu Od Bo Medrash Mimilas L'Kadsho. Now apparently this Medrash, which is all based on the word L'Kadsho, is a Medrash to be found also in the Mechilta, but a different approach of the Mechilta. And I think if I read the Ramban correctly, it's going to impact even on Zechiras Yom HaShabbos. We'll see about that. Shenakdisheu bezikaron, etc. Now again, I'm not sure what the word bezikaron means. I've been racking my brains on that for a long time. If I had the ability to do so, I would change the text a little bit, And instead of zikaron, I would call it nazkir. But again, it could be zikaron means nazkir. But the key word here is nikadshehu. So when the Mechilta interprets the word lekadsho, it's very literal. Lekadsho means shed nikadshehu, that we will sanctify the Shabbos. And that one word in the Ramban, I think, changes everything. That now we have a chiyuv to sanctify the Shabbos. And then he says ke'inyan. Now the word ke'inyan is also, I think, a critical word here. It means I'm going to give you a beispiel. You know what a beispiel is? Another example. Where do we find an example in which we are called upon to be makadesh? We are commissioned to sanctify the 50th year of the Yovel year. Shahayaton Kiddush Bezdin. Okay, I mean, again, that's Bezdin. I don't know. The analogy here to Kiddush Nasa Yovel, they Bezdin, over to our Kiddush Zochis Yom Shabbos Kacho of your individual Kiddush, my individual. It's a little bit of a leap of faith. Lomar B'Yovel Mekudosh Mekudosh. Now, if you would have asked the Ramban whether or not you can Mekadosh the Shabbos and fulfill the mitzvah of Zocher B'Zechiras Machshava Bilvad, I would say that the Ramban is rejecting that. It's not enough to have a Zechiras Machshava, because the Ramban is equating the mitzvah of Zocher Yom Shabbos Kadsha with the mitzvah of Kiddush of Shnas HaYovel, and the Ramban says explicitly, Lomar means to speak it out, to enunciate it, Mekudosh, which is Sugya the Gemara Rosh Hashanah. You have to say Mekudosh. Again, we're going to have to face the music here and figure out what's the parallel. Where do we have Mekudosh in our Kiddush on Friday night? Joe?
I'm just trying to understand also the fact that Shabbos isn't understood as is Hashem, the seventh day. It's something from Hashem, and Yovel really is determined, at least with regards to exactly what day Yovel starts or whatever, is really in our hands.
Right, so this is a very great kasha that we have to address. Where do we find a mitzvah to be Makadosh the Shabbos when Shabbos is Kviya B'Kaimei, the Kedusha comes from Shemayim? We can't change that the seventh day. It's a given, and God sanctified it. So the Ramban apparently understood that the Shnas HaYovel is also automatically sanctified, but yet we have a mitzvah to be Mekadosh it. So, I mean, there's a very radical, paradoxical situation here where on the one hand, the Kedusha is inherent and it will be there whether we like it or not. But on the other hand, we are called upon to be Mekadosh it. Now, I don't know did you ever hear of something called, what's it called? Baliatos, yeah, it's called Perish Ala Torah Lebaliatosis. I don't know if it's published in the regular Mikros Gedolos Chumash. I'm not sure. But anyway, in the formulation of the Baliatosis, the analogy between Kiddush, if you take Lakacho literally, Kipshuto, that it means to sanctify the Shabbos, is not an analogy to Yovel, as we see here in the Ramban, but rather an analogy to Bechar. And this is Sugya Masechta Nidarim. I believe it's on Daf Yud Dalet, on Daf Yud Beis. Could check me out. And the Gemara says that Bechar mitzvah lekadsho. Now, what is a Bechar? A Bechar is Peter Rechem. So that Kedusha of a Bechar, which has to be brought on the Mizbeach, that's a given. And yet, the Gemara establishes that mitzvah lekadsho, meaning I have to look at that Bechar and say, Harei Kadosh. And I think what the Balei HaTosfos are trying to point out, that there's an excellent analogy here. If you're looking for a case of something that's Kadosh Me'elov, it's got a Kedusha V'Kaimei, and yet we're still commanded to be Magdashid, the best example would be Bechar. Now the Ramban may be avoiding Bechar simply because the Gemara has two different opinions as to whether or not there is a mitzvah to Kaddish Bechar, and he's trying to avoid getting involved in this thorny, controversy. But for sure, in the case of Kiddush HaYovel, everybody agrees. It's Gemara, nobody disagrees on that Gemara. And Mekudosh. You have to be Mekadosh Shnas HaYovel. Also, Shnas HaYovel is a little bit more similar to Kiddush HaShabbos because it's all Zmanim, whereas Bechar is already Kodshim. That's already a different part of Halach. Now, I want to make a few comments, and you're the jury. Comment number one is that the Tur in Reish Ayin Aleph seems to indicate that one should recite Kiddush as early as possible. Now, I know that doesn't sit well with us. I remember in Toronto, I was at more than one home as a guest in which they came back from shul on Friday night and they sat on the couch. And there were chairs around the couch and the family got together and they started schmoozing. Very nice, a good bonding experience for the family. We like bonding, don't we? But the Torah seems to indicate that at the first possible moment, you should recite Kiddush. Don't delay. And the impression I got from the Torah is that it has nothing to do with Zriza Makdimim L'Mitzvahs, but that's inherent in the mitzvah of Kiddush that you should be Kaddish as early as possible. And the Ramban writes in Perikov Tes that you should be Kaddish B'Knisaso, which also gives the impression that as soon as the Shabbos enters, you should be Mekadosh. So my first comment on this Ramban is that I begin to appreciate the urgency, so to speak, of being Mekadosh the Shabbos, because you want to sanctify the entire entity of 24 hours of Shabbos. You don't want to leave anything out. My second comment, according to the Ramban, is that if Kiddush is an obligation to be Mekadosh the Shabbos, so why do we need a bracha? I mean, in Yovel, did Bezdin make a bracha when they were Mekadosh the Yovel? Maybe they made a bracha on mitzvah, it's possible. It's also. But here we're talking about a bracha on Kiddush, which is the essence of Kiddush itself. Why didn't you say Mekudesh Mekudesh? And Ge'endik D'Maisa, what do you need a bracha? And furthermore, why do you need yayin? Okay, so that's not a kasha. Because I'm going to try to prove to you in a few lines that the Ramban holds that yayin is only d'Rabbanan. But again, we could always ask the question, why did the Rabbanan make a takana to recite Kiddush al yayin? I would never think that Bezdin, when the Mekadosh, the Shnas HaYovel, they would have a cup of wine. It's what I call min b'shein mina. What's the connection between wine and being Mekadosh? Unless there's another element here. Again, if not for this Ramban, I'm okay, because I would say that Kiddush is all about shvach, is all about praising Hashem and praising the Shabbos. So we add wine. Whenever we want to praise Hashem, wine adds an extra dimension. Ein shira el b'yayin, the Gemara says. But now the Ramban is stripping Kiddush of any element of shvach. It's all about being mekadosh the Shabbos, sanctifying the Shabbos. My next question is, where do you see that we go ahead and we mekadosh the Shabbos? Where do we sanctify the Shabbos? Now open up your Siddur. Take a look at the nusach of Tfilas Arvis B'Leil Shabbos. Take a look at the Bracha Me'ein Sheva. Take a look at the nusach HaKiddush. I'm hard pressed to find any indication that we are being mekadosh the Shabbos. At the best I could see is that Hashem is mekadosh the Shabbos. Ato kidashta. But where do we do a Maisa Kiddush? Where did it get lost? I'm also a little bit confused about the role of Noshim in Kiddush, the responsibility of a woman to make Kiddush. I mean, we say that Kol Sheyeshno B'Shmira, Yeshno B'Zechira, women are included in Shmira, and therefore, ipso facto, they're included in Zechira. But now you're telling me that the mitzvah is Lekadsho, which means to Mekadosh the Shabbos. I don't know exactly what role a woman should play in being Mekadosh the Shabbos. I mean, certainly in Kiddush, Shnos Hamas, Hayovel, there's no function, no contribution of the women folk. It's, they're not part of the Bezdin. Okay, we don't have to go that far with the analogy, but But now I get to my last question, and this I think perhaps holds the key to a lot of the problems that we raised. And that is, in the Ramban's second round, starting with the word Avol Rabbeinu Od Medrash, what do we do with the first part of the pasuk? Zechiras Yom HaShabbos. And here I want to raise a chakira, a yeshivish chakira. Two possibilities. It could be that the Ramban is not changing his mind as far as Zechiras Yom HaShabbos. He's only changing his mind about Lekadsha. And if that be the case, the Ramban holds that in this pasuk, made up of 5 words, we have 2 different mitzvahs. We have one mitzvah that applies the whole week long to remember the Shabbos, and then we have a special mitzvah on Shabbos to be Mekadesh the Shabbos. And those 2 mitzvahs are so fundamentally different, Mizrach L'Mairav, that I would even argue or throw out an option that we should count it as 2 different mitzvahs in the Taryag, which is ridiculous. I don't know that anybody counts 2 mitzvahs in Zechiras Shabbos. Well, lucky if you get 1 mitzvah. Another possibility would be to say that according to the Ramban's second approach, the mitzvah of Zechiras Shabbos, written at the beginning of the pasuk, is all part and parcel of Lekadsho, meaning we're not going out of the box and addressing a mitzvah that applies from Sunday to Friday, but rather within Shabbos we have both Zachar and Lekadsho. What then would be the content and the meaning of Zachar? How would Zachar manifest itself in a preparation for this culmination of being Mekadesh the Shabbos? That's the most complicated question of all. Again, I'll say something, but it's very tentative. It's like a diamond in the rough. It really needs to be polished a lot. That maybe the Zechira on Shabbos is also a part of being Mekadesh the Shabbos, meaning we said that Zechira encompasses many different dimensions, whether it's, to focus on the Kedusha Shabbos, whether it's to reject any involvement in this world, whether it's Shvisa, that I rest on Shabbos for the sake of Kedusha Shabbos. All these activities and mental attitudes are all preparations for being Mekadesh the Shabbos. Maybe you can even go a step further and say they're all part of the Kiddush of Shabbos. Because we asked, after all, where is the Kiddush of Shabbos? I mean, according to Ramban's second shot, where in any matbesh or tefillah or Kiddush do we say Mekudesh Mekudosh? So maybe the Zechiras Yom Shabbos Lekadsho is one long, all-encompassing entity. It's a whole constellation. And the sum total of all of these different, points or individual experiences is Kiddush Hayom HaShabbos. In which case, it's only one mitzvah in Taryag. Now, I just want to read to you one line at the end of this entire presentation of the Ramban, in which again he quotes the Mechilta, and he says, Sham mitzvah zos lamda mimilas lakacho. Okay, a mitzvah zos. I don't know what he means by zos, but let's say lakacho, to sanctify the Shabbos. Avol Zechiras Yom HaShabbos mitzvah l'zachor tamid b'chol yom k'moshe pirash. So I think what the Ramban is doing over here is he's excluding my second possibility in the Ramban, in the second shot in the Ramban, namely that somehow Zachor is also on Shabbos, and it's part of this whole constellation of Kiddush Hayom. And rather, he's going back to his original shot in Zechiras Yom HaShabbos, and then we add Lakacho to sanctify the Shabbos. So again, just to summarize, the Ramban seems to be outspoken about the fact that during the week we fulfill the mitzvah Zechiras Yom HaShabbos, and when we enter into Shabbos, we fulfill the mitzvah of Lakacho. And now the Ramban adds 4 words, which I think is an answer to an unexpressed question, meaning we have to read between the lines, fill in the space with a question, and here's the Ramban's answer to the question. From the answer, we'll get to understand the question. El shekakol mitzvahs zechira. And therefore, b'minyan echad b'cheshbon ramach mitzvos shenitztavinu b'hem. Kol mitzvahs hazchira. I think what he's saying is that everything is one mitzvah. And therefore he says, beferish, b'minyan echad, b'cheshbon taryah. And the Ramban is apparently coming to answer a question which, again, he doesn't spell out, but he implies it. That if we're going to go back to our original pshat in Zachor and integrate that with our pshat in Lekadsha to Mekadesh the Shabbos based on the Mechilta in the second round, then Lechor we should count 2 different mitzvahs. There's one mitzvah called Zechiras Yom HaShabbos Lekadsho, which means the whole week long. And then there's Lekadsho specifically on Shabbos to sanctify the Shabbos, to generate a Kedusha Shabbos. And that's a whole new mitzvah. We should count it therefore as 2. And the Ramban's answer, which again, I don't know how to work it out so well, but he says that Hakol mitzvah Zechira u'b'minyan echad b'cheshbon ramach mitzvahs. That's all one mitzvah of Zechira. And again, I come back to that pshat that I said before, that everything that we do during the week to remember the Shabbos will culminate in the ultimate remembering of the Shabbos when we, on Shabbos itself, sanctify the day. And therefore, it's all part of one Zechira, counted only as one mitzvah entirely. So this is, I think, an adequate job, if I could say so, of an overview of everything the Ramban is saying here in Parshas Yisro on the Pasuk Zechiras Yom HaShabbos Lekadsha. So that was meant to be half the shir for today. The second half of the shir is in the Ramban in Parshas Bereishis. So with your permission, we'll end the shir now because it's getting a little late. Although on my clock it's barely 4 o'clock. But I think on your clock it's probably close to 9 maybe. Wow. I wouldn't mind going back to 9 o'clock. It would give me almost an extra day of learning. But so this Ramban is at the beginning of Bereishis. Don't bother with the English translation of the Ramban because the Art Scroll says this is beyond the elucidation of this presentation. So that's not going to help us. And we'll try to rack our brains on the Ramban in Bereishis and see if we could somehow find a linkage between that Ramban and the Ramban in Parshas Yisro about the mitzvah of Zohar. Now, what day of in the month of Tammuz is next Wednesday? Right? Shivasa B'Tammuz was on Sunday. Am I correct?
Yeah.
That means Monday was the 18th, Tuesday was the 19th.
27th.
Today is the 20th. So today's the 20th of Tammuz?
27th.
So that means a week from today is the 27th.
Yeah.
So we're getting very close to Chodesh Av.
You only have the circular driveway, please.
I can't
Yeah, no,
help
not
you
where
with
that
that.
car is. We're just past that. It's a
I can't help
circular
you with that,
driveway.
David. But
Driveway, not
okay,
this-
so we'll stop here.
Very close.
David's on an important phone call.
Right here. Yes, right here.
And,
Yeah. Please, thank you.
you know, maybe we can try to fit in another shir in Chodesh Tammuz. Maybe, I don't know about Av, you know, at some point, maybe you and I want to take a little break. I don't know. Okay,
Whenever
then?
the Rav
Thank you.
wants.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a great week.